The Sky Talon pilot says her craft should be able to airlift it within 20 minutes. Airlift? Asked Genevieve. Are you removing the relics from the sanctum? You can't, sister. We've strived so. Shh, said Eleanor, placing a bare hand over Genevieve's gauntlets, which rested in a sign of the aquila on her chest, the way one would lay a corpse for burial. The blasphemer was right. The shrine is only stones. It can be rebuilt. But the relics, the altarpieces, the frescoes, I have what is important to me. Genevieve closed her eyes, as if lulled by the bobbing of the repulsor field, until she heard the howling of an engine. Where are we going? The downwash of the Valkyrie's vector nozzles sent the sisters' robes flying as it came down on the pad, settling neatly at an angle, the two rear landing struts touching ferrocrete before the nose. A side door rolled back. Within, the Valkyrie's crew chief, his lower face covered in a rebreather and his webbing secured to the ceiling by a tether, looked out at Eleanor. He was crouching down, almost casual, his arms resting on his knees as if he'd been waiting for them. He looked at Eleanor and raised a fist. We have sworn to defend Cadia, Eleanor said, raising her closed gauntlet. And as you say, sister, deeds, not words. Marshal! Maudlead knelt at the foot of his lord, his helmet placed before him in supplication. One lens remained cracked from the heavy bolter strike. I have made atonement, slain the enemy sorcerer. You have granted my request to posthumously ennoble neophyte Descares as an initiate. But I petition you once again. Please restore me the honor of the Crusade banner if Brother Malthius falls. Marshal Amelrich did not look at him. He stared over the hill of rubble that now served as the firestep of the martyr's rampart, waiting for the archenemy to come take the blasted ruin from them again. I will not, Amelrich said. Let us hear no more about it. Why not? He spat. And the moment the words left his mouth, shame wormed its way into Maudlead's stomach like a corkscrew. When you ask such a thing, you prove your contrition is not true. Forgiveness and redemption are not contractual. No good deed can erase a failure in faith. The Emperor knows your secret sin, yet you cannot admit it, or perhaps even see it. And that is why not. You have heard the call from Cadia, Marshal. We are invited to muster at the Cregan gates. I have heard it. How have you? Maudlead did not speak for a moment, ashamed. You never removed me from the command channel, Lord. I will do so, Amelrich said, keying the power field live on his sword. This is our position, our vow. We will not abandon it. The enemy comes, Maudlead, and the Emperor calls. Get off your knees, and let the Cadians worry about Cadia. She was sitting on an ammunition crate and spooning breakfast gruel into her mouth when he found her. Captain Kestrel? Hannah Kestrel? The lieutenant was a few years younger than her, 21, possibly 22, and he had the sallow, slightly flabby look people get when they spend a lot of time on voidcraft. His blue naval uniform had yellow facings and markings from an air wing she didn't recognize. He wasn't looking at her, but calling generally, as if he'd been told where she was but not what she looked like. She let her arm, exhausted from the mere act of eating, drop the tin spoon into her porridge with a plop. Yes, what is it? Ah, there you, he began, trailing off upon seeing her. Kestrel's return had not been triumphant nor formal. After turning over her picked tubes, she'd endured 6 hours of debriefing, most of it standing up. What she'd seen, where she'd gone down, how she'd contacted the wolves, what, if anything, she thought was going on in the pict she'd taken. 4 men from Kraft Air Command had just sat, filling the room with their low-stick smoke and asking question after question. They had not reciprocated. None had given their names. Every time she'd asked the status of Stetson Airfield, the 89th Combat-Picked Recon, or whether she'd fly again, they said the same thing. That is not currently relevant. When it was done, she'd only had the energy to eat a starch bar and crawl onto one of the cots in the unassigned persons hall, waiting for orders. She hadn't even changed clothes. "No salutes, Lieutenant?" she asked, voice dripping with irony. In her torn and blood-stained flight suit, she barely looked like a human being, much less a superior officer. "Well, due to Navy rank structure, we're technically the same grade, but if you want one, I'll oblige you." The lieutenant offered a collegial salute. He did it naval style, with the palm facing in, and after a moment she responded with the palm out militarum standard, not bothering to rise. They were both casual gestures, the kind a sergeant would have bawled her out for as a cadet. "Do they want me back for more questions? Can I finish breakfast?" "No, sir," the lieutenant said. "I mean, no questions. And you can bring the chow if you like, but I have a ground car pulled around and we have to move it soon, so... Pardon, have you seen a Medicaid, Ma'am? You're limping." She had seen a Medicaid on arrival, for all of 5 minutes. He'd wound bandages around her feet, then moved on to a trooper with a forehead laceration. "My boots are full of blood. I can get you new ones," he said, opening the door of the open-topped utility ground car. "I'm Lieutenant Sobin. I'm your new ground coordinator. Anything like that you need, I'll handle." She climbed in gingerly and sat. "A new flight suit?" "Sure. Yesterday I would have said no good, but something freed up in the supply line and things are flowing again. They're practically giving lasguns and helmets away. Literally, if you count the new civilian militia." He climbed in and slapped the driver on the shoulder. "Sergeant Pavel?" The ground car jerked into motion and turned onto a gravel roadway, tires crunching the stones. "I want to go back to Stetson if possible," she said, half shouting over the open-top's engine. "Back to the 89th Combat Picked. Request a transfer up. Sorry, can't do it. Stetson got hit bad on the first day of the air war. It's been evacuated. You're assigned to Ramstead now. The 89th functionality doesn't exist, just like my outfit, the Scar's 233rd Naval Airlift. Your boy Creed really scazzed us on the first day. He's not my boy. Sorry. Anyway, whole theatre is a mess. We got pilots without aircraft, aircraft without pilots, ground crew with a pilot but no aircraft, gunners without pilots. Well, you get the idea. It's all catch as catch can now, matching up crews and equipment however we're able. Cadian locals in Navy aircraft, vice versa. My wing was transport logistics, void-to-ground stuff. Supersonic delivery boys, really. Well, now I'm with you." He paused to slide a pair of solar tint glasses onto his face, the wide-lensed, stylized kind Navy flyers wore. A stamped aquila rested its claws on the bridge of the nose, and its outstretched wings formed the upper frame. "Some poor bastards are flying airframes they've never clocked hours in before. Kraft Air Command's just smashing units together to cover losses and keep us flying. We're both Squadron 399A now." "What's the air stand for?" "Amalgamated." She said nothing, put her hand to her brow to block the sun. After so long in the battle smoke and briefing rooms, her eyes weren't adjusting. "Hey, it's pretty bright today. You want some tints, Captain? We got plenty considering the number of unclaimed footlockers at base." Sobin held out a folded pair of tint glasses matching his own. She took their hand off her brow and accepted them gratefully. They helped, and she decided she didn't completely dislike Lieutenant Sobin after all. "Thanks," she said. "Least I could do, considering the citation." "Citation? They didn't tell you? You're getting written up." Frick. She closed her eyes. One of the 4 men yesterday had been a commissar. "For aircraft loss?" "What?" "No, I mean you're getting cited for valor." He dug in his jacket, extracted an envelope. "I'm guessing that's what this is." Kestrel took it, stunned at how heavy it was. After a moment of dumb staring, she could only say, "That's the seal of Air Marshal Shroud." Kestrel cracked it open, ran her eyes down the page. For all those who read these present bearings, note that Captain Hannah Kestrel of 399th Squadron, Amalgamated, and Lieutenant Lahon Darvis of 89th Combat Picked Recon, deceased, have this day been awarded the Black Shield of Cadia, the highest award for gallantry in support of combat. "Frickin' sons of cowards," she snarled. For a moment, she wanted to crumple the paper and throw it from the ground car, but it would feel too much like spitting on Darvis's memory. "What's wrong?" It seemed like some big deal. "It's a non-combat award for conspicuous valor while in support of combat operations." "What? That doesn't make sense. You're a combat pilot in a combat unit. Else, you were shot down. And doesn't an observation Avenger mount a weapon?" "A defensive weapon. And no, though I fly in a war zone, it's still considered support. I'm not rated for offensive aircraft." "Well, that's a shame," said Sobin. "Because you've got one." "What?" she said. Distantly, she noticed the ground car had lurched to a stop. He pointed past her shoulder and she turned, and scrambled to her feet, holding the ground car's roll bar for support. 399 is a strike outfit, said Sobin. Air-to-ground speciality. And there's your mount. "Thrawn," she breathed. "God, Emperor, look at it." "It's a little battered. She's a patched-up Navy model, and the back seat's a servitor, not a gunner. There might be kind of a smell, but it's the best we can do for now." Kestrel looked over the aircraft, from the swept-down wings with their vector engines to the blocky tail. It was in grey navy drab, its canopy open and waiting. And under the nose, in the place Deadeye's picture array sat, were the gleaming barrels of a rotary bolt cannon. "What's its name?" "Doesn't have one. You got one in mind, sir?" "Wargate," she whispered, then turned. "When do we fly?" The Cregan Gates. Cervantes Glaive couldn't help but crane his head to look at the golden underside as they passed beneath it. Above him, on the interior of the massive structure, were gleaming bas-reliefs of battles past. Glorious campaigns on foreign worlds, heroes of the past. Files of tridome helmets and cantrail pattern lasguns. Generals in full-dress uniform, holding models of planets they had liberated. A chronicle of resistance against the despoiler. Put a bayonet in the despoiler himself. That voice had got stronger. Throughout his battles on the northern Alpha Curtain Wall, the fight back against the Raptors, and the tide of warp evils that had come after. They had been putrid things, lithe and sinuous with razor claws, moving in a way that entranced and repelled. Thankfully, most of his contact with them had been through firing slits in the thick wall, but that was only partial protection. Their perfumed smell was hard to describe, like drinking wine only to find it was not fully fermented, but still rotting mash. When he looked at them, thought about them, Glaive got the horrid sensation of flower petals lightly brushing his skin, at first with the softness of a spring bloom, but the more he paid attention to it, the more those invisible blossoms crinkled and withered into the scratching of a desiccated flower. He felt the sensation returning and shook the memory off with the mantra. Put a bayonet in the despoiler. The words must be saint-spoken and emperor sent, because they had seen him through the fights in the wall, the fallback to the Beta Wall, and now the breakthrough battles in the retreat to Kraff. As Kazakin, they'd served as outriders, bouncing along the flank in a stripped-down Taurox, scouting for threats, then speeding away as Glaive poured into them with the pintle-mounted Stormbolter. With that mantra, he had gunned down monsters, and whispering those words, he'd fired on heretic Astartes, until his kill count rested, by his own reckoning, at 3. Granted, it was hard to tell in combat who shot who, but Glaive knew it in his soul. Was that improbable? That one guardsman would kill 3 mutated transhuman monsters? No, it was not improbable. It was miraculous. And miracles, by definition, defied belief. Similarly, he and the rest of Fireteam Gamma should have died 1,000 times by now, but they hadn't. Another sign of divine favor. Sergeant Veskaj was still alive, as, incredibly, was Stitcher Kristen. The rest of Fireteam Gamma were new faces, peeled off from remnant squads. They were not important. None of them. They were all there to deliver him to the point where he could, in turn, deliver Cadia. Because Glaive was on a mission from the Golden Throne, and the front lines of a siege were the perfect place to fulfill that sacred assignment. He, Cervantes Glaive of the 27th Kazakin, would kill Abaddon the Despoiler. 2. Ercanthos entered the chamber shrouded in night, his long shadow wings wrapped around him like a cloak. The fortress air ran cold, often only a few degrees above freezing. Yet as he came, he brought the hot stickiness of the charnel house with him. A tangy abattoir reek, like the final panicked breaths of livestock who have just smelled the gore and seen the cleaving axe. The War Master's chosen recoiled with the force of his presence, or at least what chosen remained. Cromgat's chair sat empty, the lord of the undivided slain by the savage sons of Russ. As the demon passed, the warp-infused blackstone of the doorway crawled closer, as if drawn to him as water is drawn downhill by gravity. Out of the corner of Morkath's eye, even the War Master's thoughts slowed in their motion, the zodiac reshuffling as planets rose and fell, so many of them tainted furious red. Only Zaraphiston the Seer smiled, and he alone kept his back to the demon prince once named Ercanthos. "War Master," the Ascended Lord said, the thought speech desynchronized from the movement of his caged jaw. He gave a courtly bow, holding his shadow cloak behind him in one hand, so the Chosen could glimpse the red muscle underneath. "Fellow brothers." Then his head came up, and Morkath could see yellow eyes burning in the rune-stamped cage of his helmet. "Thought Reader," he said. "That explains why he tolerates you. How many know of that, I wonder?" He did not say it with his lips, nor did she read it with her mind. He sent it as a telepathic spike that pierced her language center with the sensation of being stabbed through the skull. Morkath gasped, for he no longer had thoughts. No mortal brain operated beneath the skull. Ercanthos was pure warp manifestation now. No mere meat vessel channeling the ether gods, but part of the empiric pantheon itself. "Ercanthos," rumbled the War Master. "Or do you name yourself differently now? Though I have risen to a prince of demons, I am still Ercanthos to my friends." "Are we friends, then?" said the War Master. "Your brothers fight across Cadia, your own warband unsupported by their commander as they struggled with the Sons of the Lion. And yet you, without telling this chamber, have slaughtered the Emperor's fanatics to bribe your way to ascension. I ask, thing that was Ercanthos, is this the behavior of a friend?" "It is the behavior of one who knows what is required for victory," hissed Ercanthos. "That is what you have taught me, War Master, to do what is necessary. And an ascension was necessary to take Graf. We have gambled much on this battle, Ercanthos. This final siege of Cadia, and I will not have you trading it to your red god. I fight for no god. I fight for you. Fight to own me, perhaps. I wonder If you are the same Mercanthos who was my axe in the whirl of the eye, who forsook petty gods to follow a greater path, why would you say this, Ezekiel? All I have done is become a greater warrior that can be used in your crusade. We do not fight crusades, Ercanthos, he said, shaking his head. That is what they do. Launch blind crusades for their god. It is why the warp hungers for them, because they are looking for a master. I wanted you to be your own ruler. Ercanthos stepped forward, clawed feet digging into the blackstone. His stride was so long he stepped over the table to stand before the Warmaster, and Morcath could not help but shrink back. You abuse me! Level charges of disloyalty claim I am not yours. You were never mine. I am claiming that you are not your own. It is folly! Ercanthos spread his stance wide, and Morcath realized it was only the raised Noctilith throne that forced him to look up at the Warmaster. If her father climbed down, he would be level with the smoldering rune of Khorne branded on the demon's chest. Abaddon did not speak for a moment, letting Ercanthos stand in this position of humility. You have broken the covenant of this chamber, Ercanthos. To bring no being here with you. No warriors, no slaves, and no demons. Yet a war parasite rests on your back. It is not the first time. I do not know what you mean. Your bloody-mouthed god has given you many gifts, Ercanthos. But lying was not one of them. Though you may be an ennobled lord of the warp, you forget that I am the Warmaster of Chaos. And though I care not for titles, the warp gods give them to me, and among those is Commander of Demons. It was only then that Morcath saw the ripples of warp energy drawing back through the Noctilith floor, withdrawing like a sea before a tidal wave and collecting under the Blackstone throne. Ezekiel, what is this mock? Tell me your name. The words howled forth from the depths of the warp, coming from the Warmaster's bottomless mouth in a chorus of voices that sounded like nothing more than atmosphere tearing out of a holed ship. It washed over Ercanthos in a tide, and as it struck him, the black shadow cloak leapt up in full extension to reveal his wings, their leathery darkness seizing and quaking like the creature were being electrocuted. Pale, misty eyes blinked in shock and pain, and it keened with the sound of a drill bit on steel. Ah, Jesus! The mouths of gore! Begone, warp shade, out of my ship, and never again enter. It was the most horrible thing Morcath had ever seen. Deep-sunk talons ripped free, shadowy leech mouths full of rings of hooked bone teeth detached, vomiting blood. The shade pulled itself upward, stretching and tearing, and the white eyes receded into the empty dark eyelids to become bleeding mouths. The shade was not part of Ercanthos, but grafted onto him, a psychic parasite. The Cornate Lord bowed in pain, muscles bunching, bellowed at the floor so loud his helm cracked, so loud Morcath had to cover her ears or become deaf. Then the shade flapped upwards into the haunted vaults of the fortress, and there was quiet. Ercanthos panted, snuffled, blood poured from his noseless nostrils. I am the Warmaster of Chaos, more powerful than any thrall demon. You say you are a prince, but a prince is not a king. Do you understand me? I do. Thank you for the lesson,
War Master, and for ridding me of that creature.
It was difficult to hear Acanthos through the blood flowing from his mouth. Morcath did not need to see the Demon Prince's thoughts to know his fury. The yellow eyes spoke of murder. I believe that I have made you a promise. And like all promises I make, it still stands. Do you wish to lead the attack on Krath?
I do. War Master, the others have put Cadia on the altar, and I will slaughter it.
Go, and do so. Acanthos turned and strode from the chamber, bleeding freely from the delta of craters left along his spine and shoulders. And though he did not turn, Morcath heard his voice, again meant only for her.
You see how he treats his friends, Fortress Child. Imagine how he treats his creations.
When the chamber was empty, the War Master dismissed her with a single order. I could not read his thoughts, War Master. You cannot read Acanthos, who will soon either destabilize the Chosen or die. You cannot read Zaraphiston. Cromgat is slain by the wolves. Your usefulness grows meager here. It is past time for you to find the vermin. Forces gathered at the Cregan gates. The finest troopers of Cadia, plus multiple allied guard regiments, under the strategic eye of what was certainly the greatest Lord Castellan in 2 millennia. Formations of tanks and armored vehicles, squadrons of aircraft, 2 commanderies of the Adeptus Sororitas, a baronial household of House Raven fighting a rearguard action, an unheard-of alliance of the Space Wolves and Dark Angels, alongside scratch companies of Astartes from 24 chapters. And as if that were not enough, a full war cohort of Skitarii. Perhaps the most interesting and varied assemblage of Imperial forces that had ever defended a single city, hardening their strong points for what was sure to be one of the most momentous fights in the history of the Cadian Gate. And already the forces of the Black Legion were hammering the breastworks and aegis lines thrown up before the 30-story-high bastion that guarded the way into Cadia. Hunting packs of Mauler fiends, raptor harassing assaults, insectile war engines so bristling with limbs and weapon mounts they defied any categorization. One would think that such a bounty would cheer Trazyn, but he stared out of the oubliette with frustration. His towering stature meant that he saw directly over the helmets of the Cadian 33rd's second trench line. I am like Warden Zadir at the feasting table, Sanet. It is agonizing. That comparison is a bit dramatic. It is dramatic because it is from the dramas, Trazyn snapped. Though even in his defensiveness, he knew Sanet had a point. The Royal Warden Zadir, as the old place told it, had tried to betray the Mefrit during the Flesh Times. In punishment, they had sewn his mouth shut and forced him to attend lavish feasts as he starved. Hyperbole or not, I hate sitting here looking at so many possible acquisitions, and these fools are going to throw them away. Trazyn's vocal actuators emitted a series of chiding clicks as he shook his head. Down the line, a Helldrake flock had dived down to immolate 2 squads of the Cadian 9th. It had been like that for 2 days. Dive and burn, hammer and retreat. The hounds of Abaddon slamming the aegis lines like a storm tide, softening them up with each wave. If you step out of our shooting height, you will be seen, said the Huntmaster. The game will detect your scent. The old Deathmark sat cross-legged on the floor of the hyperspace oubliette, his synaptic disintegrator broken down and floating in a layout as he inspected each part. Allow me the luxury to lament, Game Warden. To watch history when one could participate is no easy thing. Should we decide to bag a specimen, though? The Huntmaster took the focusing tube of his disintegrator and mimed blowing through it, despite having no breath.
I can oblige you.
Surely you are not thinking of taking an active hand, Lord Archaeovist. You have already tipped the scale once, and to risk doing so twice could never be worth the possible cons.
No, no,
Trazyn answered with an affected weariness.
I suppose not. Wisest to let nature take its course,
the Huntmaster agreed.
Yes, I'll only interfere if the human position gets very desperate, or if it will amuse me.
It was good, Trazyn thought, to set parameters.
How long can Cadian forces hold the gate? Asked Orvan Highfell.
Creed pursed his lips around the cigar, considering his answer. Kel found himself shuffling his feet in discomfort. Creed was making the Wolf Lord of the Iron Wolves great company, not to mention the other worthies, wait, and it was all Kel could do not to nudge him. Usually the tallest man in any room, Kel was still unused to the sheer size of the Space Marines as they clustered around the hollow projection table. Creed never appeared intimidated in the presence of the revered Adeptus Astartes, but Kel, even after a career as glorious as any in the Guard, could not help but feel a little like a boy of 7, dressed in a cadet uniform and sitting at the adults' table during the Rest Soul Day feast. Highfell, it was said, had seen the legendary days of Horus's betrayal, and now he stood in their command bunker, looking out on Kraft's northern muster field. They'd pulled the command section back from the top of the Cregan gates the day before, when it was clear the position was too exposed to enemy artillery and airstrikes. That hadn't been planned in advance. A basilisk-sized round had dropped directly on top of the wall, so close that it had killed an entire section of logistics staff and spattered stone debris across the heat-flash bubble of Creed's refractor field. Creed hadn't even been wearing it at the time. He hated the weight of the humming, buzzing thing around his neck, said it gave him a headache, and the dumb bastard would have been killed if he'd walked 10 feet to his left. But, Emperor be praised, he had been leaning right over it, scrutinizing the holotable. They'd managed to evacuate Creed before the enemy battery zeroed their follow-up shot. Holotable, staff, and Creed's personal Kazakin detail withdrew to a fortified passage in 30 seconds, closing the stairwell blast door just ahead of a direct hit. Afterward, Kel had given him a rare dressing down in private, at least as much as he could given the difference in rank, and the triangular field projector was hanging once again atop Creed's breastplate.
How long can we hold?
Creed mused, pulling the cigar from his lips and blowing a stream of smoke that wavered the hollow.
Hold for what, exactly? That's the question. A little obtuse, said Lieutenant Ashar.
The Raven Guard's armor was covered in purity seals, only partially patched and reconsecrated from the vicious fighting at the Joris redoubt. Half his languid face lay flat, a cheekbone broken.
We have a plan, I assume.
We do, said Creed. Though some forces in system are trying to disengage and join us here, our problem is we don't know when reinforcements from the rest of the Imperium will arrive, if they're coming at all. Who knows if our distress signal was heard? But we have one other option. He withdrew a data key and slotted it into the holotable's input port. When he turned it, a number of new markers flickered into being on the projection. Each listed a facility name and list of units. What you're seeing is the most closely guarded secret on Cadia. Something not even High Command has been aware of, though it has not gone unnoticed. Logistar General Rake bent close and read the unit designations with an acid tone. 11th Kazakin Air Assault, 282nd Shock Infantry, 91st Heavy Ordnance Battery. Why, Asaka, it's the lost reserve units. They weren't lost, Konskavan. I knew they were there. These facilities are what's known as salvation outposts, deep cover bunkers constructed thousands of years ago to allow a planetary commander to keep a reserve army in their back pocket, one that could emerge when the time was right. If you've heard the old Cadian myth of the army under the mountain, ready to roll out when Cadia needs it most, well,
That's a folklore distortion of this reality. And it's time for them to heed the war drums and pounce on the traitors as their backs are turned. Heifeld smiled, bearing a grin that was more lupine than Kell remembered. Exactly. That's our play. We will allow the archenemy to draw up siege forces outside the Cregan gates, then smash them from the rear with the nearest salvation units, fresh from their hold safes in the Rosvar. They are the hammer of the Emperor, we are the anvil. To besiege the besiegers, said Master Corahel. He alone of the Space Marines still wore his helm. When can they be activated? That's the tricky part. Timing. To trap the archenemy forces, we cannot reveal the reserve too early. Our foes must be fully committed and dug in, unable to suddenly maneuver out of the trap. I estimate if we activated them now, it would take at least 24 to 36 hours for the closest 3 regiments to receive orders, deploy from their positions, and fight their way to our aid. But we must not show our hand too early. The enemy does not yet have real siege elements in place. No heavy artillery, heavy armor, or troops massing in the numbers needed. Once they commit, we can activate. I would not think of this as a traditional siege, Canoness Eleanor said. They are led by the ascended demon they call Ercanthos, with nearly limitless troops at his disposal. And the despoiler is restless for victory. Creed nodded. Do you wish to brief them, Inquisitor de Verna? The inquisitorial legate, her scalp marked by a sutured cut that looked quite fetching, Kell thought, nodded. Our intelligence profiles suggest he is the despoiler's closest and most devoted warlord, a member of his inner circle. No doubt he has been tasked with storming Craft and destroying the Null Array. We assume this is some type of reward or boon granted to him, a sought-after honor for his loyalty. You may find, Corahel cautioned through his helm grill, that loyalty in the Black Legion does not mean what you suppose. That's what we're hoping, Creed said, pointing at Corahel before retracting the finger, concerned he might cause offense in the gesture. Currently, this siege appears exclusive to Ercanthos and his warband. If we destroy him, will the others fall to bickering over who gets the glory of taking us down? Thanks to Lord Highfell, Cromgatz is already slain. The archenemy might have limitless troops, Canoness Eleanor, but his command echelon is getting emptier by the day. According to debriefs with our allies in the Adeptus Astartes, de Verna nodded towards the demigods, the Black Legion is no Cadian battalion with a clear chain of command. It's a group of rival war bands that have coalesced around charismatic leaders. Personal loyalty is everything. Frontline troops revere the despoiler, but their bonds of fealty tie them to direct commanders, who have in turn pledged to the master of the Black Legion. Break down his command structure, and the despoiler will lose command and control. Great waves of troops are only an advantage if you can direct them. Eleanor nodded. Let us discuss this delaying action, then. Yes, let's, Creed said. Officer, adjust the focus of the table. I think the last hit on the sky shield misaligned it. When the tech dialed in the image, Creed held out his hand for the long table stylus. A classic defense in depth operation, he said. 15 companies of the Cadian 33rd Infantry are here, manning the Aegis lines before the Cregan gates. I've also supported them with the 9th, largely heavy weapons companies. Creed reached with the arm-length stylus and pointed to a fan spread of troop blocks marked 33 with the letters A through I, messily superimposed over the maze of trenches. The images clipped through each other. We've dug in a group of Lehman Russ patterns from the 292nd Armoured as static firing positions, hull down behind the earthworks, but able to reverse out in case of a pullback. That will get messy, though. Hard to maneuver groups of tanks in reverse through a choke point. We've issued the crews incendiaries with orders to ditch and burn at the slightest hint of a traffic snarl.
Tanks we can replace from the armored stores, but able crews are in short supply. How long do you expect it to hold? Asked Heifel, stroking his long beard. The 33rd are crack troops, and I've informed Colonel Deschênes he must repulse the enemy for as long as possible while we prepare. The 33rd loves him, and if he asks, they'll do it. Kell could hear the hedging, the veiled worry under Creed's bluster. That is not a number, said Corahale. How long will he hold? Hours? Days? 2 days at current casualty rates. 1 if Acanthos is reinforced. The hope is to reduce the Hounds of Abaddon before they create a breach, because the real war of attrition isn't here. Creed tapped the Aegis lines before the gate, then moved the long stylus into the warren of streets behind the gate. It's here, behind the Cregan Barbican, and within the outer ring of Kraft's civilian habs. They were purpose-built to funnel attackers into ambushes. I have some surprises awaiting there for when the Barbican falls, including 3 fresh regiments of Kazakan. They know this district and its alleyways inside out. There are false streets that lead to dead ends, courtyards we've sealed off with steel portcullises to create killboxes. Else, half the street signs have been changed around so they can't be followed. House-to-house fighting where every hab is a hardened bunker. It's going to be bad for the Hounds, especially with their combat doctrine. We'll break them into small groups and annihilate them. Add another 24 hours of delay, but that's still not the endgame. He slapped the tip of the stylus on the open space just ahead of his new command bastion, behind the warren of streets. The northern muster field. Here's where it will be decided. Whatever remains of the traitorous assault, with luck even Acanthos himself, will break through and strike the Cadian 8th under my personal command. Our plan will be to encircle and destroy. They will be taking enfilading fire from both flanks, courtesy of the wall guns sectioning off this muster field. Canoness Eleanor, if you would do my troopers the honor of deploying in their center before the command bastion, I'm sure they would appreciate both your firepower and calming presence. Master Corahale, given that you have been operating with the Iron Wolves, I had hoped your 4th Company would deploy with them on the right, and Lieutenant Ashar, your demi-company, on the left. Armor, asked Heifel. I mean besides ours. I have some partial regiments we can throw into the flanks, sighed Creed. But many have to be positioned at other gates in case of simultaneous assault or hardened push elsewhere. They're devilish exposed on this open field. I'll commit some, though in the main this will be an infantry brawl. What about the Mechanicus? Growled Corahale. I do not see your Magos clan here. Magos clan has requested that his Skitari Maniple deploy within the Egressium Gate at the foot of the command bastion, guarding the passages to the Null Array. I agreed. The Knights of House Raven, sadly, are engaged elsewhere. Creed turned to Crank, advancing the hollow projection eastward, where giants roamed. Baroness Vardis has successfully delayed the advance of the Legio Volcanum in the east at great cost to her household. But Volcanum is still nearly in range of the Citadel. There is a very, very large warlord class with them, which she cannot realistically stop. What if we commit air support? Asked Heifel. The largest beasts are still prey to raptors. Creed blew air out through his lips, as if leaking cigar smoke, though his stub lay cold in an ashtray. Already committed. I greenlit a series of strike packages suggested by Air Marshal Shroud, and I am pleased to report that the Valkyries of the Howling 119th have managed to disable the tainted behemoth. When can they be back here to support our own operations? Asked Eleanor. They won't be. The 119th consisted of only a dozen operational machines when Colonel Strecker volunteered for the strike. It was a martyrdom mission. He personally took the warlord offline by diving his aircraft into the Titan's command room. Silence. The 119th effectively no longer exists. Apart from aircraft and crews grounded due to damage, it's non-operational. I've transferred all active crews to the 8th Support Wing. I ordered them destroyed, so I'll take in the survivors. We have awarded the slain crewman the Iron Gate First Class, said Kel, and Klavenstrecker the Star of Terror. Our air support situation has not improved then, Corahale mused. Kel was amazed by the Master's seemingly endless pessimism. We have scratch companies of space marines fighting under scratch companies of air wings, and civilian militias holding the gates. When is this madness to begin? The preparation should be complete in the next 12 hours. The salvation bunkers can be notified and set to roll open within 4 to 6 hours notice of Akanthos committing his forces. That should provide plenty of time to... But out before the Cregan gates, an ink-dark bolt of lightning slammed to the ground. It rent the sky in two, as if cracking reality and exposing the void beyond. Darkness rushed from it, covering the sky. All along the walls and through the fortified city, spotterlights snapped on to search for targets, then went orange and died. Power cells sapped. The holotable in front of them blinked like a man falling asleep under sedation, then went dark. With respect, Lord Castellan, said Odric Ashar, I do not think we have 12 hours. 3. Sable lightning slammed Akanthos into the burnt planetary crust of Cadia, the etheric teleportation burrowing through the hill of corpses heaped before the Cregan gates. It blew Cadian and cultist bodies aside as it struck, their mouths and eye sockets briefly alight with warp fire, jaws working in a silent chant. When it struck topsoil, it fused the earth to glass for 50 feet in every direction. Akanthos knelt, buried underneath the charnel heap, breathing the atmosphere he'd sworn to burn, feeling the trickle of spilled vitae running down the corpse mound like light rain dribbling through a forest canopy. "Master," said Artesia, and he could feel the chill shade of her slipping through the hot darkness, fed by the blood. She settled on his shoulders, and he let her bite. "It is time to show them your glory, all of them above and below." His taloned feet hammered down, bunched shoulder muscles heaving upward so the corpses, still jittering in their electrified spasms, tumbled away from his rising form. As he broke air, he pulled his axe free, scattering bodies. He stretched his tree-trunk limbs and shadow wings wide. "Blood!" he bellowed, for he knew nothing else to say. "Blood!" And in a micro-instant of cognition, a thing sensed and known rather than seen, he knew that the corpses around him, with their burning eye sockets and gaping warp-fire mouths, were not randomly seizing with the electrical strike. No. Their mouths were opening and closing, trying to speak with empty lungs and tongues that snapped sparks and glowed with the energy of the true reality. "Blood," the dead mouthed. "Blood, blood, blood." Around him, his hounds of Abaddon took up the cry in a chant, not screeching or howling, but deep and bass-filled as a war horn. "Blood, blood, blood," until the word had no meaning, only a driving sound that was near a weapon in itself. Akanthos made no speech, rallied no troops, and told them no plan. There was no need. He promised them the only thing they desired. "You will have blood." And then he was bounding across the battlefield, crawling three-limbed over heaps of Cadian and Cornate dead, a bulwark of the slain heaped in front of the murderous wall guns of the Cregan gates. They were but obstacles. Cold blood, tacky and coagulated. displeasing to him and his god. No, not his god. To him. For as Acanthos tore towards the Cregan gates, smelling blood and crushing skulls beneath his feet, his oneness with Khorne came upon him like a violent storm. He had not been mortal for eons, yet now he was so much more and less than he had been. Before he had used the warp like a ship catches the wind in its sail to propel its keel through the water. No more. Now he was the wind. He was a part of Khorne himself. A dazzling barrage of energy beams lanced from the walls, stinging his skin and punching clean holes through the hounds around him. Arcing shells cracked open above them, showering burning chemicals that warped armor and scalded flesh. Las cannons, volcano lances, incendiary phosphor shells. Things that burned and cauterized, incinerated warriors and left behind smears of greasy ash. Weapons that shed no blood. It enraged Acanthos that the enemy, these pathetic flesh bags which existed only as offerings to him, had stolen from him the substance of worship. That each drop of blood burned to carcinogenic, invisible particles was one Khorne would never taste. He dived into the Aegis line, kicking aside a shield emplacement and impaling the soldier behind it on his foot's long foreclaws. A dug-in hellhound spewed fire at him point-blank, immolating a squad of Cadian infantry in its panicked discharge of the Inferno cannon. Acanthos sliced out with his axe and severed the turret from the tank's chassis as if striking the head from a man, then roared in indignant fury as the severed promethium lines ignited and filled the vehicle with flame. No blood. No blood. He sunk his taloned hand into the yielding steel of the wreck and levered himself over it in a jump, landing on 3 men in the communication trench, their ruptured insides bursting from their skins like he'd crushed rotten fruit. The rest of the squad scrambled backwards, peppering him with panicked snapshots. He unhinged his jaw and spewed a torrent of pins and razors that rent them, stripping one side of them down to the bone and painting the trench with a fantail of gore. The magic of taking what should be within and bringing it without, of exposing a thing down to its barest components. His hounds surged over the Aegis line behind him, chain axes keening songs of praise to the taker of skulls, each bolt pistol discharge throwing vitae that sanctified the air and blessed the earth when it fell like rain. The momentary relief of the violence soothed him, before a yellow dart sliced into the trench to his left, and Artesia barely had time to cloak him with her wings before the defenses around him ignited in nuclear fire. Hounds died, flesh burned to ash by the superheated air, or lifted into the sky as living warriors and falling to earth as dead statues fused inside their armor. In the past, Acanthos had been driven deeper to rage madness at the loss of his brothers. The precious hounds who had followed him since the day they turned on the false emperor. Each kill he'd made after suffering a loss like this one had been a lamentation, an expression of anguish, grief channeled through his axe. Now, he cared not. He was not one of them, and they were the worst kind of fools to look at him as their leader rather than their harvester. Each was a tool that helped spill more of the carmine promethium that fueled his blazing fire, and who would, as they fell, spill their own contribution to his magnificence. But burned, they were wasted, stolen from him.
Artillery!
He howled, both yelling the order and forcing it upon the minds of his war engines and up to the ships.
Explosives here!
As he darted towards the storm sword super heavy that had immolated his men, the first barrage began to fall among the retreating Cadians and the berserkers that hacked at them. High explosive rounds, built to maim and disembowel, flayed Cadians and hounds alike with brass shrapnel. Airbursts coughed down cones of rusty spikes that nailed flesh to dirt and flakboard walls. The storm sword tried to back off, stinging him with twin streams of las cannon fire. Ground shuddered and spat beneath him, and he realized he was galloping across a strip of landmines. But his muscles were swollen hard with the fresh infusion of slaughter, and he barely felt the detonations. Axeblade met tank glacis, and in the moment before the strike, Goremouth sliced her wings in on either side of the weapon, scoring guide cuts in the steel that the butcher blade cracked open. The armor crumpled inward, like a ground car hitting a lumen pole at full speed, the front of the super-heavy tank collapsing in a V-shaped gouge. Acanthos felt the driver, hull gunner, and loader crushed between the front and outer bulkhead. Felt a pleasant sparkle of pain on his side as the gunner manning the dual-heavy bolters on his left held down the trigger in an unthinking spasm as shattered ribs punctured his organs. Deep inside, shells began to roll loose. Crew screamed. Acanthos did not wait. He leapt straight upward, Artesia beating her shadow wings to propel him the last leap to the golden wall of the Cregan gates, where he sank his axe deep and began to climb.
Blow the gates,
he bellowed, as a salvo of orbital fire threw debris into the air behind him, pulverizing the sacrifices he had brought Khorne.
Raptors, to me!
Climbing upward, claw, axe, claw, axe, claw, axe. Gold plating and stone rubble rained on him with every smashing handhold. Defenders on the wall's fighting parapet, spitting down at him with las fire. Shoulder-fired crack missiles streaking by, tickling him with their cotton twists of contrail. Artesia battered the ordnance away with semi-corporeal flicks, so they went tumbling and careening towards the ground.
Blood! Blood! Blood!
One slammed into his shoulder and detonated, and it was like boiling water had scalded him across his back. He howled with pain, but it turned to elation as he saw his own hot blood splash the golden bas-reliefs of human ancestors, baptizing them with what was within, just as he would their descendants on the wall top. He clawed up 3 more handholds and grabbed a macro cannon protruding from the wall face. Laughing, he wrapped the barrel under one arm and levered it down like a wrestler breaking a limb, pushing with all his atrocity-fueled strength as stone cracked and rebar strained like ligaments. The artillery piece, barrel, breech, firing platform, and all, came out of the wall, carrying a square of rockreet with it. Panicked artillery troopers tumbled screaming into the air and dropped 20 stories to the slaughter pit of the melee below. Then Acanthos swung inside to the sounds of wailing, and the banquet of red, sticky delights began. Westall had his accident during Helska's time at the hostile environment training school on Prosan. The first time she'd lost a trooper under her command. Prosan was a blasted world in the Cadian system, supposedly spoiled in a long-ago war. Cooked hardpan flats and craggy mountains of volcanic glass, drifting radstorms that could blow up without warning. They had to wear fully sealed environment suits just to complete the daily formation marches and mock battles. It was what she'd imagined the world would be like in the wake of an exterminatus. Westall was a special weapons operator, a veteran, dependable. Far more dependable than the 21-year-old Helska, who was fresh out of the St. Gethsemane Infantry College and building command hours to take the captaincy exam. Perhaps it was those years of service that had killed him. Westall, nearly 40, boasted that he'd fought in 3 war zones and never suffered an overheat. He lavished his weapon with preventative maintenance, often obtaining passes to continue cleaning its coils and praying to the machine spirit long past lights out. He knew how heavy to go on the trigger. But all 3 combat stripes on his sleeve came from temperate zones. Prosan was different, and his muscle memory did not adjust to the reality of its baking atmosphere. His plasma gun failed him their second day, as they lay on the rim of a volcanic crater, firing at the mobile target servitors buzzing around the floor of the caldera below. Helska sprinted to him as soon as she saw the vent of blue-white flare, an image that licked and twirled like flame, but was there and gone in the same way as a lightning strike. She got to him fast enough to see the plastic and rubberine suit still running and bubbling like liquid on his raw red underskin. His face was charred on one side, and it cracked, revealing pink underneath as he screamed. He was rolling, beating at the suit hardening on him. Teeth on the right side of his mouth had cracked in the heat discharge. He threw off his heavy rubberine gloves, which were smoking. His lovingly maintained plasma gun lay in the rocky soil, spitting liquid solar fire from its burst pipe coils that fried the earth. Helska saw it just before it happened. Westall, insensate, rolled over the rim of the crater in his panic and pain. Only when his legs slid into space did he try to grab hold of the edge. It would have been kinder to let him fall. But Helska didn't want to lose a man. Especially not as good a man as Westall. That was not what a good officer did. She grabbed his reaching bare hands. "I have you, Westall! I have you!" But to her horror, Westall still fell, the skin of his hands and arms stripping away, as though he were wearing a lady's pair of long evening gloves and was sliding out of them, and leaving Helska with empty sleeves, marked with the skull and gate tattoos of a Cadian veteran. For that reason, she'd been grateful that after calling for her uncle's plasma pistol, she had not yet found cause to use it. The day Cadet Lieutenant Xander fell had been the last frontal assault. The enemy seemed to have lost the taste for it. Instead, they launched a series of sabotage operations and flanking maneuvers. Volskani sappers conducted night raids on the bastion walls, trying to blow their way in and spike the guns that cost them so heavily on each approach. They conducted fire-and-move artillery strikes with field guns limbered to the back of the Raquine monsters. Artillery crews had spotted several large cargo haulers pulling into the valley where the archenemy staged their attacks. Clearly, they were stocking up for a big push. Then, for the last 2 days, it had been mountain war. 2 units of Volskani pioneer companies had managed to hook around and find a line of ascent up the northern face of Rosvar's dagger. If it had not been for the artillery observers who had been living in the observation post since their arrival, and the warning they voxed before the Volskani butchered them, the pioneers might have seized the heights above the cleave and rained lasfire and grenades on the forces guarding the roadway. As it was, Sergeant Plyn and his snipers had caught them on the rock face, slowing them long enough for Captain Kyung and his Alpine company to respond. But now, Kyung was stationed up there permanently in case of a repeat, which meant fewer lasguns on the roadway barricade when the cargo haulers came. Not as a supply convoy, but as a weapon. "The wheels!" Helska shouted into the Vox amplifier, standing like a tank commander in the open hatch of a dead chimera. "Not the driver! Target the wheels!" Tall and wide as a 2-story bunker hab, long as a train car, the huge vehicle barreled towards them, engines growling with promethium hunger. Lasfire spanged off the slab panels welded to the driver's windscreen. A multi-laser sketched a burning orange line across the grille, popping one of the head lumens that had kept doused so they didn't see it coming. Heavy bolter shells chewed roadway and popped the front tires. A missile landed short and skipped across the rockreet like a stone on a lake, missing the vehicle entirely. The machine hurtled on towards them on the wheel rims, sparks fountaining on either side. The trenches would be no impediment. They were mere grave ditches now, collapsed and stuffed with enemy dead. Helska's hands shook as she raised the plasma pistol, thumb sliding the charge dial forward. Felt her tongue retreat into a knot in her throat as the gun began to hum in her fist like a living thing. When she'd taken it out of the case after receiving it at her uncle's flag ceremony, the only time she'd done so, until the cleave, she'd been so afraid of it, she'd assembled it with the coil in backwards. The hauler was nearly in pistol range. Autocannon rounds punched through the improvised armor of the crew bay, and in response it blasted its horns in defiance, filthy steam pouring from its chimney vents. Helska laid her finger on the trigger, watched each coil flare and turn from neon blue to overcooked white. Tick, 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 tick. "Sir," Reviewer said, tugging a sleeve. "Sir, we should withdraw." "Not now." She took a breath, held it, tried to control the shake of both hand and pistol. A red warning rune winked on, a keening tone nearly covered by another air horn wail from the hauler. Helska slammed her finger all the way down. White-hot solar energy lanced from the pistol. The recoil of the discharge was massive, and the shot climbed higher than she'd anticipated, striking the fender just above the right wheel, spalling away plasteel that dropped molten and hardened in the cold air. Only because the overcharge stream was so long was she able to walk it down to liquefy the 3 deep metal wheel rims on its right side. It hit the trenches, already canting to one side, the shallow ditch making it heel over like an equine with a broken leg. Stress metal groaned as the driver's cab rolled over, the momentum of the cargo container behind crushing the crew compartment against the ground as it tried to follow, then itself wallowed sideways with a double wham, wham, as the whole smoking vehicle rolled onto its side, then its roof. "Engineers!" Helska voxed over the cheers and applause. "Secure that! It has improvised ordnance! Disable it before it—" Helska was never able to finish the order. Over the cheers, she heard the hammer of quad guns and crew weapons high up in the bunker walls, shooting at something now screened by the bulk of the crashed hauler. Vox bleats sounded in a microbead. "Approach! Grid 9-2 Alpha! Thrawn! It's another one! Different angle of approach! Fleck! It's under my field of fire! I can't get a beat!" Helska only saw it just as it came around the head of the wrecked hauler. Another cargo vehicle, cutting not right at them but diagonally across the mouth of the cleave, towards the undamaged Southern artillery barbican. This hauler was not only armored, but also covered with wire mesh nets that held barrels and cylinder bundles to its body. Tube charges. "Vehicle bomb!" Helska barked into a microbead. She was already swinging down the tank hatch and hauling it closed. Dropping so fast, she accidentally booted Udza, standing below so Helska could use the wired handset in the cheek. "Cover! Cover! Cover!" The blast wave lifted the front of the Chimera Hulk into the air, tilting it backwards onto its rear track angle before dropping it back down with a swaying jolt. Helska disentangled herself from the heap of struggling bodies that was her command squad. Someone was swearing about a limb fracture. She ignored it and looked out the driver's slit. A 5-story hole, bigger than any artillery strike, had been carved out of the southern barbican. Rockreet had shelved away into a scree slope, the interior floors of the hive bunker defenses exposed. In one compartment, an artillery crew continued to work the gun carriage of their heavy mortar, their hyper-focus of loading and firing unaffected by the damage. One floor down, a shell-shocked trooper stumbled towards the light. His uniform jacket had been torn right off his back by the blast, and a scalp injury covered his face in blood, as if he wore a red veil. He stepped unthinkingly off the edge, and dropped 4 casements down onto the scree, where the boots of a Volskani storming party trampled him. 24! Helska said into a microbead. She slammed the hatch stud at the back of the Chimera. "Move to repel! Southern Barbican! Clear it room by room! And fix bayonets!" The archenemy was inside, and it was a blade fight now. She drew her power sword and stoked the plasma coils to a humming brightness. Had Trazyn been around Creed's command table, discussing the vulnerability of Abaddon's command structure, he would have found the present situation darkly humorous. After all, Creed had made a similar gamble by posting the Cadian 33rd Infantry before the Cregan gates. Famed for their resolve, it was well known that the unit's high morale was due to the inspirational leadership of their longtime commander, Colonel Vikram Deshane. So when the Raptor Pack dived down on the fighting platform of the Krieg Barbican, murdering his command squad and plucking the colonel into the air, the regiment lost its most crucial asset. Still, the 33rd might have held, fought to avenge their beloved officer, but the Raptors knew their art, and their art was terror. They did not kill Vikram Deshane, not immediately. First, they dangled him above the trenches by his arms, kicking and twisting like a prey rodent, their vox pickups amplifying his sobbing, pleading final words. When they were sure the whole regiment was watching, they began to tear Deshane apart, dropping his blood like rain, letting pieces of him fall across the trenches. Each agonized moment broadcast and recorded, so his screams continued long after he was nothing but a red skeleton. Then, Chaos fleet guns pounded down onto the combat in a fresh barrage, killing Chaos Space Marines and Guardsmen alike. The 33rd broke. Not in the well-ordered fighting retreat that characterized the withdrawal across the Craft Plains, but a full rout, dropping lasguns and stripping equipment, abandoning trenches and vehicles. The Cadian 9th, their heavy weapon stations now unsupported by infantry, followed. Berserkers soared into their backs as they ran, caught them with bolt fire as they clambered out of trenches and ran across open ground, stripping helmets and armor in an attempt to get to the few open slab hatches that would take them through the wall. None open to them. Trazin shook his hooded head, clicking.
They have breaching charges on the gates. It's over here. Handmaster, take us to the next line.
Behind him, his personal death mark closed the oubliette and prepared to translate inside Craft Citadel. Cervantes Glaive looked out of the firing slit in the third-floor bunker hab and saw the Cregan gates bow inward as the breaching explosives blew.
"The held," he said. "Thrawn. They actually held." "Don't be so sure," said Sergeant Veskaj, bending down to put his head next to Glaive. "Look!"
The doors were opening, slowly propelled by crowds of tiny, black-armored figures at their base. Countless squads of traitor space marines manually pushing the Cyclopean doors inward, foot by foot. Hundreds of Black Legion troops poured in, like a dam gate releasing floodwaters. Raptors zipped through, breaking off in packs towards predetermined targets. Insectile war machines and demon engines ground forward, heedless of mashing their own troops beneath their tracks. That was when Creed's surprise fired. 2 full-armored regiments lined up, their cannons pre-zero to the Cregan gates. Valkyries hovering, ready to loose ordnance. "Fire!" said Stitcher Kristen. "Fire, you bastards! Fire!" Blast shock pounded backwards through the craft outhabs, the sound ricocheting through the alleyways in successive claps that deafened troopers not wearing their helmets with their audio baffling. Earthshaker shells, melter shells from heavy mortars. Valkyries sent Hellstrike missiles streaking down into the mass, the rear of their underwing rocket pods flaring in spiral patterns as they loosed orange-glowing parabolas of destruction down on the leading edge of the Hounds of Abaddon. And ahead of that, a full regiment of Kazakin crewing bunkers and casements, their hellguns filling the air so thick with white lasers it burned an afterimage into Glaive's eyes, even through the tinted lenses of his helm.
"Frickin' Thrawn,"
he swore, blinking the purple streaks out of his vision. "God Emperor," said Kristen. "They're still coming!" Glaive looked back, and the Medicae had been right. Hundreds of heretic Astartes had simply disappeared, vaporized, or immolated into char. Yet more came, tearing through the snowdrift high ashes of their dead and shouting their war cry. "Blood! Blood! Blood!"
"To positions!"
Sergeant Veskaj reached back and clicked his Hellgun's reactor online. It spun up with a "Pwee!"
"You know what to do. Kill as many as possible."
"It's what I was born to do, Sarge," responded Glaive. He raised his newly issued melter gun and kissed the Aquila crest on the frame. It was not a bayonet, but if Abaddon came, it would do. Around Creed's holoprojector, tactical officers shouted updates and reports, navigating data slates and flipping clamp-bound intelligence binders with one hand, the other pushing their microbeads deeper into their ears. A dozen messenger skulls hovered like buzzing insects above a pond, awaiting answers to their queries. To one side, a Mechanicus tech priest chanted Benharic code prayers as his mechadendrite finger cabling attempted to stabilize the image on the overloaded holotable. Ahead, a shell arced over the outhabs and landed just ahead of the sororitas formation, marshalling in front of the command bastion. Faces were grim. Word had gone out to the salvation bunkers, but Voxnets had been mangled badly, and the Valkyries dispatched to hand-deliver orders were being preyed upon by Drakes. Creed's error on Zero Day coming back to bite them again. 36 hours, Kel thought. We have to hold them 36 hours. He tried to calm himself by immersing into the familiar chorus of an active strategium, a mix of murmuring voices and artillery fire. Second Kazakin reporting hard contact, hand-to-hand fighting, casualties significant.
Body and 44th Steelhearts now engaged. Initial losses?
Lads Demon among the gun crews in wall section Citadel North. They are... We're seeing total breakdown among 33rd units on the wall. They're abandoning positions.
You.
Creed pointed to the last tactical officer.
Ravi, is it? What are you saying about the 33rd?
Full retreat, sir. Ravi, unlike the others, did not hold her ear as she worked. One had been replaced by an inbuilt augmetic. We thought it was just a pullback from the trenches, abandoning positions that couldn't be held. Fighting withdrawal. It's not. They're running. Full flight away from the gate, along the wall and out into the streets.
If they're not defending the wall, that means there will be more breaches. And we can't funnel them into the outhab warrens properly.
No, sir.
Cal, he asked. The orders.
Kel did not need to ask what orders he meant.
Sir? It's time, Creed said, holding out an expectant hand. Hurry, Jaren. Now, please.
Kel pulled the two plasteel scroll caskets from beneath his breastplate, where they'd rested ever since the sobering night he'd presented Creed with Lucas Baston's sword.
General,
he said, handing them to his commander. Creed stepped close to the junior-grade tactician and spoke low.
Take these. Listen to me. Ravi, eyes on mine. This is important. Take them yourself. No servo skulls, no transmission. Do it in person. Take my Valkyrie and a fire team of Kazakin. One goes to Air Marshal Shroud, the other to Logistar General Rake, who may have further orders for you. Do not open them, and do not let anyone but those two open them. No one. Not even the goddamn risen Emperor himself, you understand?
Yes, sir, but my station...
I will put someone on your station. Go now, with speed. She ran. You, son, Creed gestured. With the bionic throat, you, stand in for her. Keep your eye on that wall as...
He trailed off.
Frick!
Creed exclaimed, tugging at his finger.
Dumb frickin' son of a...
Kel stepped in. What is it, General?
Forgot to put my seal on the damned caskets.
He pressed his signet ring into Kel's hand.
Catch her, Kel! Don't let her get on the Valk without stamping them!
Real panic gripped Kel's throat. He should have noticed. Should have absolutely noticed. But the babble of the strategium and lack of sleep was making him sloppy. If they went out unsigned, Shroud and Rake might not know the orders were serious. Might think they were enemy disinformation and leak them to intelligence. Hand them to Inquisitor Talia Frecking de Verna. Then they'd all be against a wall. He took off at a run, grabbing the Vox officer Cormacan and dragging him along. Ping the Valk. Tell it not to take off until we've seen Ravi. Absolutely do not lift, understand? He switched on his chest-mounted Voxhaler. Ravi! Tactical Officer Ravi, halt where you are. We have further order... On the communication bridge to the Valkyrie platform, he saw her nutwood skin and black hair flash as she turned around, as if unsure she'd heard correctly. Ravi, come! The explosion threw him forward, the thunderclap bang of it slapping his eardrums so his hearing turned to a whining tone of tinnitus. He was on his knees, would have fallen except for the colours of the Cadian 8th, which held him partially upright. Cormacan was rolling, holding his arm. Creed. Oh, throne. The Lord Castellan. The crater on the Bastion's command deck was 20 feet across. A direct hit. Where tactical officers once circled a command table, was now just a hole in the rockcrete, punctured by twisted plasteel rebar. A junior tactical officer lay to one side, her impeccably pressed ivory command uniform unmarked, despite the fact that her lower half in its blue trousers lay shoved against the opposite parapet. Two messenger skulls wiggled drunkenly through the air, unharmed apart from the blast hooking their wire message cages together. "Asaka!" Kel shouted, forgetting in his panic the proper mode of address. "Asaka!" He tossed the collars of the 8th to a stunned orderly and plunged into the shell hole. His boot heels slid in the loose scree, and he went down on his back, slithering into the cone. "Asaka!" He saw a uniform sleeve emerging from a rubble pile and ignited his power fist, using the limb's artificial strength to lift a shelved piece of rockcrete the size of a hatch off it. The limb rolled free, and he saw the gold braid and red facings of a naval attaché. Nearby was a piece of fabric stained grey by atomized rock, but when Kel brushed it clean, he saw it was the red robe of the tech priest. "Asaka!" A noise answered. Coughing. He found Creed below a piece of rockcrete the size of a coffin lid. The Lord Castellan was dusted, grey as a ghost, his hands over his face. He'd only survived because the crushed housing of the holotable had taken the weight of the falling slab. "Medicare! Medicare, here!" Kel shouted, letting the slab fall aside and kneeling. "Asaka! General, sir! Are you hit?" Creed moaned, sat up. "General, are you—" "I can't see, Kel. I can't bloody see. Don't try to move, sir." "Frickin' Medicare! Front, damn it, where—" The section Medicaid slid down beside them, his butterfly zip kit already open. "What do we have? How is he?" Creed started. "He says he can't see." "Concussion blindness," the Medicare said, clicking on a handheld stab light. "Sir, if you could put your hands down." Creed started, then coughed out chalky dust. His face was covered in the rockcrete powder, with clean trails in the pattern of his fingers. "Sir, don't speak," said Cal, putting a hand on Creed's shoulder. "Concussion blindness. That can be temporary, right? Shell shock?" "Could be." The Medicaid upended a canteen over the Lord Castellan's head to wash away the debris, and shined his light in Creed's squinting eyes. "But it could also be detached retinas, trauma to the brain's visual center, even internal damage from the pressure change. Creed slapped the stab light out of the Medicaid's hand. "Will you freckin' sons of deserters listen? It's not freckin' concussion blindness. It's this thrown damned freckin' thing." He thumped the triangular refractor field on his chest. "Bastard flashed like a photon grenade when it went off. I told you I don't like these things, Kel." "You're better off than the rest of the command section," Kel said. Creed looked around. "Oh, shit. They got damn close, didn't they?" "Too close," said Kel, turning towards the crater rim. "Cormachan. Sir?" The Vox officer looked down. He was pressing one arm against his chest, with the other hand on the Vox receiver built into his helmet. "Are you wounded, Cormachan?" "No, Colour Sergeant. Just an arm fracture. I'll be fine." "Raise that damn militia Colonel Gent. Ask him what he's doing about those artillery spotters." "Actually, he's on the Vox now, sir. He says it's locked in." It was the first one that had been the most difficult, Salvar Gent reflected. But that was always the case, wasn't it? The first credit you stole, the first sexual conquest, the first murder. You had to get over that initial one before you had confidence and momentum. This was the same way. At first, with only 2 of the specialist Voxes, they hadn't been able to triangulate the signals when they picked them up. Both Vox operators would scan up and down the bandwidth before they hit on a signal. Then they'd both tune to it and wait, hoping they'd catch a request for a strike, and there would be a second follow-up message acknowledging the hit or walking the second barrage closer to target. But with 2 Voxes, they only caught the direction of the broadcast, meaning that even when they dispatched their teams of triggermen, the search parties had to comb half a district top to bottom. Finally, they'd staked out a likely target,
an airfield against the citadel wall, and waited. It took them 3 searches and 3 separate broadcasts, but they found the woman at the top of a chimney stack in an abandoned manufactorum, camped out on an internal maintenance catwalk. Then they had 3 voxes, and things became easy. They got momentum, learned the broadcast patterns and types of places the spotters like to hide. Trigger teams fanned out all over Craft, embedding themselves in districts and waiting for a call to bring them coordinates. They shoulder barged doors and hab blocks, climbed up weather monitoring towers, kicked down the sheet metal walls of rooftop sheds. Each time they ended it with a blistering hammer of shots from their short-pattern autocarbines, the kind with drum magazines that were easy to hide under a cloak. Each time they got another Vox, and their citywide interception net became larger and more tightly webbed, able to catch the really cunning fish, like this one. The Vox hissed. The bell ringer put the magnoculoscope up to his eye, the broad form of his back hunched over the specialist Vox. His positioning was brilliant. A northwestern bell tower that had a clear view west all the way out to the curtain wall, but could still see the northern citadel marshalling ground through a screen of gun towers. He put the magnocular down and reached for the receiver, and Ged distantly observed that he had a clubbed hand. "Is that why you didn't change your broadcast channel?" he asked. "Is it hard for you with the one hand?" The bell ringer's hand froze over the receiver, then relaxed. "It's you," he said, turning. "For a minute I thought—" His words trailed off when he turned around. Whomever he'd expected to see, it was not Ghent in his rumpled officer's greatcoat and slicked hair, a pair of Aquillas shining at his throat. "There was a lot of trouble finding you, did you know that?" Ghent said. "Good spot you have here. We expected whoever was dropping ordnance up north was in the northern district. It stands to reason, right? You shouldn't be able to see the northern muster fields from here, at least not normally. But then we remembered that melter torpedo yesterday. Punched right through the sky shield. Dud, supposedly, but still brought down the Hydra flak tower that was blocking the line of sight between here and the muster field." The bell ringer's throat worked, the knot there bobbing. "Wow," the Vox bleated. "Shh, sweetheart." Ghent looked at the Vox with a finger to his lips. "We'll get to you in a moment. I'm dealing with your greedy friend here." The bell ringer was still frozen, his hand clamping and unclamping above the Vox receiver. "That's how we sniffed you out. You got greedy. Didn't change frequencies. You could taste that big score, that next artillery hit right out of your reach. I always warn people about that. It's what gets you caught. Too much thinking about the end result, and you stop being careful. And suddenly someone you really don't want to see is standing in your door." "I've killed him," the bell ringer croaked. "That oppressive bastard Creed. He pretended he was different, but he still sent men like me to mean your labour, called us civilian scum, and lied to our faces while cutting our rations. I've killed him for the liberator Abaddon, and in revenge for 1,000,000 Cadian children weeping due to empty bellies." As he spoke, the bell ringer's hand drifted towards the Voxet. "If you were hungry," said Ghent, steeling himself to move, "you should have come to me." The bell ringer was fast, snatching the stub pistol up from the floor with a strength that came from hauling one-handed on bell ropes for 2 decades. He rose up from the floor, snarling with brown teeth. Ghent didn't draw, he just stepped aside. The trigger man behind him already had his autogun leveled, held in a hip-shooting position found in no Cadian drill manual, but ruinously effective at short range. Solid slugs the size of a fingertip chopped into the bell ringer, tearing his robes and driving him backwards as his muscles spasmed from the trauma. His stubber discharged a single shot that flattened against the cathedral bell above, tolling out a final note as he fell backwards through the window arch, where he looked down upon the soldiers of Cadia like a vengeful god. Ghent did not bother to look where the bell ringer fell. He merely crossed the tower and scooped up the Vox receiver, waiting for the last of the reverberations to die away before hitting the transmit rocker. "Hello? Hello?" he said. "Are you still there? Confirm?" Wow. And you're going to get it, my friend. Much more. He reached out and slammed the keyloader switches to neutral, dropping the channel encryption. "Craft Air Command. I know you're listening. Triangulate this signal. Fix origination point outside Craft as ground target. We narrowed it down to sector..." He snapped his fingers, gestured. A woman with one of the illicit Voxes on her back shuffled into the room, showing him a map. "We'll put it in Sector 6 Gamma 3. Happy hunting." The squealing, breathy voice at the other end of the broadcast fell silent, as if stopping in the middle of an inhalation. He hated to admit it, but Ghent was having fun. 10 minutes later, Warkite dropped in on the approach. They were right where Air Command said they were going to be. 3 Spite engines that had once been super-heavy artillery. Webs of spongy flesh stretched across their armored hulls, big, snail-like bulges humped over the chassis. Enormous cannons of bone and metal angled out like a telescope from an observatory. They'd slipped out from under the camouflage netting that had hidden them for days, trying to run on their tracks and stubby anchor legs that pushed them along like tortoises. Warkite wavered as it came in, the target sliding back and forth through Kestral's targeting reticle as she lined up the bulbous shells. "Take it slow, Kite 1, counselled Ragnall. "We'll keep the bats off your pass. Save fuel for the climb out. And coming on your 9, Rag. Half a mile. He's on you. Thanks, Vicar. I'll lead him on. You tag him out. Affirm." Her escorts. She had dedicated escorts now. Lieutenants Sterren Ragnall and Vicolin Mack. Both Navy, both mounted in Thunderbolts, and both extremely deadly against Chaos interceptors. "On the line," Kestral said. She eased back the throttle and placed her finger on the stick's main trigger, feeling the shivering vibration through her feet as the bolt cannon, so much heavier and faster than the pictor rig, rotated in preparation. In her peripheral vision, a burning wreck fell from the sky. "Got him," said Mac. "Locust down." Ground fire streaked up, green and orange. A few bursts of multi-laser fire. Minor impacts, heavy bolter rounds maybe, clattered off the bottom of one armored wing. Nothing serious. Most arch-enemy troops were throwing themselves at Craft. A lock tone. She punched the countermeasures and flare fires blossomed around her wings. 2 rockets zipped below her cockpit, seeking the already disappearing heat bloom. "Firing in 3, she said. 2. The abominations were coming up fast now, 1,000 feet out. Her altimeter read 200 feet. 1. Warkite fired its first shots in anger. The discharge rattled the cockpit hard enough she had to set her teeth. Behind, she heard a click-click as Darvis's identity tags swung back and forth into the back of the heavy stubber. She'd hung them around the servitor's neck. Bright yellow barrel flares stabbed out from below the nose of the aircraft, like a dragon breathing fire. Throne. It had to be 20 feet long. Smoke, like trailing clouds, streaked by either side of her canopy. The noise was like the sky tearing in half. Plutonium-cored anti-armor bolt shells ripped into the dome of the lead spite engine at a rate of 20 per second. It stoved the shell in, pulped the unnatural flesh beneath, threw a debris cone that peppered the next engine with flaming metal and viscera. Kestral pulled up, dragging the stream of punishment into the second engine, and this time added ribbons of crimson from her las cannons that overpenetrated and carried into the third engine. It was already burning when she swept her bolt cannon over it and scythed through a bulbous outgrowth that looked disturbingly like a head. "Good pass!" she yelled. "Good hit, Kite 1. Now up, up. Drake's inbound. Remember, don't get screwed, get altitude. Do the crime, then climb, climb, climb." Ragnall liked mnemonic devices, an annoying but useful trait. Gaztrau banked hard over and rolled out right, then turned over on her other wing to confuse any Helldrake dive killers, punching her throttle forward to climb out steep. Air Command had learned a lot about how to operate against drakes since day zero, or at least anyone still alive had. They dived and turned like raptors, but climbed like pregnant groxes. If you wanted to live, you spent as little time at low altitude as possible, but make a speedy ascent and get on top of them. And most of the time, you could spend a leisurely 7 or 8 seconds securing a hard lock before wrecking them with a hunter-killer. Out the left side of a canopy, she saw the charcoal black and coal orange of a fireball rolling skyward as one of the spite engines cooked its ammunition. "That's first blood for you, isn't it, Kestrel?" asked Mac. "But not the last," she answered. In her crew mirror, she could see the pale-skinned servitor, its mouth sewn shut, and Darvis's identity tags around its cable-laced neck. "I have enough for another pass," she said. "Let's find a new target." 4. Cracks of bolt fire echoed from the rubble in ones and twos, bright daggers of flame lighting the matte black of the Crusaders' armor. Maudlead knelt before Amalrich, placing his helm on his knee. "Marshal," he said, his voice soft. Amalrich looked out over what was once the Martyr's Rampart. Its corners and lines were shapeless debris now, no block of masonry sitting neatly on the other. Flamers had burned the fire step black. Melter shots had made rivers of liquid stone that had cooled and hardened like lava flows. Corpses, human and otherwise, lay scorched to disarticulated bone or fused into the very rock. "Send Squad Purgatos to the foot of the rampart," Amalrich said to his herald. "They think they can withdraw and rest. We will provoke another attack." The Marshal's tabard was charred brown, his great sword nicked and battered. "Marshal," repeated Maudlead, "I heard you. I have discovered our sin. It has come to me in a vision. You are mistaken." The Marshal looked down upon him with clouded brow. "You mean you have discovered your sin? It is with you that your vision... Every one of our brothers who has carried the banner has died. How many hands has it passed through? 9? 10? It is true that I was the first, and I lost honor by dropping the banner. But it is a judgment not on me, but the whole crusade." Amalrich's gauntlet drifted from the hilt of his sword, settling on the beaded rosary that hung at his waist. His fingers rubbed the charm at the end of the loop, a reliquary containing the finger bone of Saint Xander. "What could we have done to displease the Emperor? Look at these defenses. We swore to hold here in the face of hell. We have done so. To suggest otherwise dishonors the memory of our brothers. That is pride speaking, Marshal. And pride is a sin. We have held our own vows above the work set before us. Listen." Amalrich did so. Even in the slack of the fighting, they could hear the pound and roll of explosions far to the north. "Kaza Kraf requested our aid, and we refused. Our pride has led us astray, and the Emperor has judged us for it. We have fallen to the stubbornness of our gene-father, Dawn. But there is still time to redeem ourselves. Creed still calls for us, and we have one working Thunderhawk. That is not possible. We are committed by our own words. We made a sacred vow to defend this rampart before the Emperor and with our hands on holy relics. Marshal, this is a ruin. It has not been a rampart for a long while, and we did not vow to defend a ruin." As Maudlead looked up, his head still bowed but eyes raised,
He saw Amelrich's mouth tighten. The two surviving members of his command squad turned their heads, almost imperceptibly, to await their master's response.
"Tell me," said Amelrich, "about this vision."
He did not need to sleep for the dreams now. When the empty man wanted him to sleep, he slept, no matter what he was doing. His eyelids were pink and puffy. There was a bad scrape on his forehead. When the last dream came, he had been walking up a flight of stairs to make a check on one of his artillery spotters. So many of them had fallen silent, and he wanted to know why. Consciousness vanished in an eye blink, in mid-stride. When he awoke, he was face down on the steps, his head bleeding and one of his molars knocked loose. He'd slid 10 feet down on his face. And he stayed there, face down, because boots were slapping past him as men ascended the stairs. One trod on Revetska's hand, and he had to bite his cheek to keep from shouting. Lingering echoes from the empty man told him to stay down, to let them pass him like the corpse the killers thought he was. There were, after all, so many dead in this city. No one gave bodies a second glance, apart from looting them. He heard the bang of a door, a blister of autogun fire. And then he stopped his breath as the boots descended again. One paused to pat the pockets of Revetska's administratum uniform, looking for ammunition or glow sticks. And for a brief moment of panic, Revetska thought how cold the night was and how the man must feel his body heat. "I am cold," he whispered, so low it was barely audible. No louder than two fingers rubbing against one another. "I am dead flesh, and have nothing worth falling behind for." The hand stopped mid-frisk and withdrew. Revetska waited a long time after the footsteps disappeared down the stairwell. His agent was dead. The specialist Vox with its keyloader and codebook gone. At least he knew what was happening to them. Gunned down by death squads, hunted like animals, which was, after all, always how the Imperium treated humans. Despite the investment of time and effort to deploy the network, and the hours he'd spent personally training the spotters, Revetska could not bring himself to be too upset. An operation like that was always going to have an expiration date, and the agents themselves were expendable. Already, the empty man had entrusted him with a new purpose, one far more targeted. For in the dream, the cloudy eyes of the empty man had shown him where he would find the object, where it had landed, and where it was to be delivered. The most difficult thing was manpower. His network of agents had been significantly reduced by the campaign of assassination, and the vehicle and body bombers had a natural attrition rate. He'd made contact with the saboteur cell he'd seeded in the tunnel and sewer maintenance department of the administratum. Work crews like that were useful, since even the local gangs that haunted the underground tended to let them pass unmolested. No one wanted a tunnel collapsing on their heads, after all. The object was exactly where the empty man said it would be. It looked as it had when the warp-roiled irises had burned the image into his brain. It had smashed through the city, taken out a building, buried itself in the street. Its outer casing still glowed with heat when they found it, the beams of their industrial stab lights playing through the smoke curling from its metal exterior.
"Throne,"
said the foreman, his heresy forgotten in his shock.
"Is that—"
"Don't think about what it is," said Revetska. "Just get the jacks under it, raise it, and get the repulsor sled here."
We're going to move it. How? It's too big. We can't even maneuver."
"It will be all right," Revetska said, injecting empathic will into his words. "I have all in hand. We do not need to move the whole assembly, just this part." The foreman's tight shoulders relaxed, and he nodded.
"All in hand, sir."
"Good boy." Revetska knelt and opened his toolbox, selecting the bolt fastener he'd seen in his vision. His last thought was that the steel tool was cold, but then he blinked,
and his eyelids refused to open. On the backs of his shut lids, blooming like the violet of a warp storm in the dark Cadian sky, were the empty man's eyes. Far away, he heard the sound of the tool ratcheting again and again. Krrt, krrt, krrt. When he awoke, it was because of the pain in his fingers. They were bleeding, the nails ragged and broken, and he realized that they had been used, along with the bolt ratchet, to manually extract the screws in the object. Their flesh was tender and bruised, which is why it hurt so much to strangle the foreman. He was a big man, after all, with a muscular neck. Revecka tasted blood where the hulking worker had struck him in the mouth. He had to put his knees on the barrel chest to keep him forced down while he killed him. The rest of the crew were already dead, slumped over jacks and lifting equipment. Blood-stained tools from his kit lay scattered on the tunnel floor, as if they had calmly continued working as he'd bludgeoned them one by one. The foreman, though, he was smarter, stronger, more resistant. But he was also turning purple, foaming at the mouth. They couldn't live, the empty man said from behind his lids. The words came as he blinked, like a strange dot-dash military code. They have served their purpose to the despoiler. And knowing it was true, Revecka leaned his body weight down on his hands until the foreman stopped moving. He was shaky and weak when he arose, but that did not matter. The can of promethium was not heavy, and it became lighter the more he splashed on the big cylinder and the bodies that lay around it. The object on the repulsor sled, marked with bloody fingerprints where he twisted and pulled out the bolts with his own hands, moved easily on its cushion of anti-grav field as he slid it away from the flames. He moved it carefully, so very carefully, whispering soothing prayers to its machine spirit. One had to be cautious with such a thing after all. The cousin of this god munition had leveled Cadia Stark, and it would not do for the inner warhead shrine to detonate while on the sled. At least not until it had arrived at its intended place of apotheosis. In the chamber, Jan Revecka saw in the flickering, nearly imperceptible darkness of an eye blink. When the rage and bloodlust built high enough, war stopped being war. Defeat enough enemies, and it was a fight, not a battle. A personal struggle of self against the foe, less an exercise in strategy, in objectives secured or ground taken, than a need to act one's internal emotions upon the adversary. Push beyond that, and the fight became a harvest. So much blood swelling Akanthos's muscles and hardening his hide that the concept of individual victories and struggles became too abstract. The enemy was no more than wheat to be scythed, grapes to be trampled, and he entered a state where he would no more remember killing a specific opponent than he could recall cutting a single stalk of grain. That was the level Akanthos had reached when he burst through the exterior wall of the Cregan gates and dived into the ranks of livestock on the other side. That's what they were. Livestock. Receptacles for vitae. Inside the cage of his helm, his yellow, vertically slit eyes peeled away their skins and muscle, so all he perceived were pulsing circulatory systems, branching away from hearts the way root systems fan out of a plant bulb. And in cutting them, rupturing those veins and tearing open arteries, so their quick beating hearts spilled more libations for the Lord of Battle, Akanthos cared not if one came from Mordian or another was a Kazakin in heavy armor. Even those ensconced in the thick hulls of tanks were merely blood within a metal shell. Hellgun beams and bolt impacts prickled harmlessly on his bone-hard skin. And when a new regiment threw itself at him in a disorganized wave, he was halfway through their ranks before noticing that these hearts were strong, but also small and young. A full regiment of White Shield conscripts. He drove a wedge into the ranks, into the warren of streets behind where his demon sight picked up hearts pulsing and thumping in the buildings, terror-fast, like prey animals in the presence of the predator. They meant to trap him, funnel his hounds into alleys and kill zones. He could see ambushes set up at corners, weapon teams manning bunkers, humans crouching or lying in a mistaken belief they could hide from him. He charged into the main thoroughfare across a belt of landmines that stung his flanks, plunged a hand into a bunker hab's second floor and ripped the wall out, casting 4 men into the street and scooping another into his mouth, where his teeth punched through thick carapace armor. "Into the streets!" he yelled. "My hounds! Track them! Find them! Kill them!" And behind him came the hounds of Abaddon, already bloodied and reduced by the breakthrough, following him because they worshipped slaughter, and he was its embodiment. Let the Cadians spring their ambushes. Let them butcher the hounds of Abaddon. It was simply more blood for the altar. Ercanthos, prince of demons, ran ape-like on his knuckles through the streets and into the gory celebration that would follow. "Holy terror!" Sergeant Veskaj swore. "What was that?" Glaive saw it too, big and crimson, a blur that rushed past the loophole hatch, too fast and close for him to get a proper look. "I don't know, but it's big," he answered. "Heavies will deal with it. As for us..." He could hear the madman howls and chainswords of the approaching berserker pack, and unshrouded his melter gun, sticking the barrel through the stepped-back loophole that ran the length of the bunker hab. He didn't have to wait long. Glaive had barely finished muttering the benediction to peace and invocation of violence when a rush of beetle-black armor filled the street below. "Let them get further in," said Veskaj. "Steady! Steady!" The spirit moved him. Glaive pulled the trigger, and 2 Chaos Space Marines melted. "Damn your eyes, Glaive!" Veskaj poured fire from his hellgun down into the mass. Amber runes on Glaive's melter gun blinked, requesting he wait until gas build-up allowed another shot. While waiting, he triggered a frag grenade and pushed it out the slit. By the time it exploded with a dull whoomph and a rattle of shrapnel on ceramite, his melter gun was already at the loophole again. Another berserker fell, legs incinerated and hip joints fused. Still, it clawed across the ground towards the bunker, even as its companions ran it over. "On the stairs!" Stitcher Kristen warned. He was watching their backs with a hell pistol. Below, one of the trip mines they'd rigged discharged with a cough of directional pellets and a harsh screech of shrapnel on armor plate. They were on the 2nd floor already. Fast. So fast. Glaive spun, advancing towards the door with the melter gun already angled to sweep the stairs. On the indicator, amber block runes counted their way upwards to full charge. 1 amber, 2, 3. He saw an empty landing below, nearly full. The stairwell wall broke inward as the transhuman madman rammed through the wall rather than turning the corner. It put the heretic nearly at the top of the flight, close enough that he swung his chain axe at Stitcher Kristen and buried it in the rockery doorway as the Medicae flinched backwards. Red smoke jetted from a helm grill bristling with ivory teeth. "Blood!" it howled. Green rune. The melter beam liquefied the traitor space marine from eye lenses to hips, his massive, disconnected parts, the legs still pumping in a run, rolling down the stairs and leaving the chain axe buried in the doorway. "They're climbing the building!" Screams from the firing slit. Sergeant Veskaj howling as a spiked gauntlet punched through the narrow window to grab him and force a bolt pistol into his chest. It discharged, and the screams stopped. Glaive swiveled with his melter gun, but the assailant at the vision slit was already gone, letting the sergeant's corpse drop to the floor. "Stairs again!" shouted Stitcher Kristen. Glaive spun back. The legless berserker he'd seen below was trying to scramble up the stairs, towards them, shouting blasphemies. Glaive vaporized it, leaving another pool of liquid armor slag hardening on the stairs. 3 floors, said Kristen. What? Glaive snapped. No legs. It had no legs, but it clawed up 3 floors trying to kill us. Glaive thought about that, then swept the beam of his melter gun along the rockcrete stairs, eating away at the grey stone and metal supports beneath. Well, the next one will have to jump for us. For days, Morcath had assumed the enemy was clever, evasive, one step ahead of her. That the wolves of Fenris were such skilled trackers and wildsmen that they could expertly navigate even the untamed, fathomless depths of her mother. She was wrong. For near a week, Morcath had plumbed the known areas of her fortress, pushed enough warp energy into her node shrine to grow an amniotic sac, connected to the nervous system of semi-organic warp channels grown into the holes in the Blackstone. Once it was ready, she'd crawled inside the tight confines of the womb and filled it with the warp-conductive fluid medium that blocked out the noise and movement of the outer world and let her mind wander. She passed her internal eye through the vessels and arteries of the skin and nerve bundles she'd grown through the warp-charged stone, opened roomy eyes set in walls and ceilings and floors, read the thoughts of maintenance slaves, so catatonic with the terror of their thraldom that their memories were near blank. A Fenrisian might have walked past them, barging one aside and breaking its shoulder, and 10 minutes later it might not have remembered the event. Twice she gathered her strength and sent a pulse through the nervous system that awakened the imperative cantrip she'd psychically grafted into the minds of the chattel. For 2 hours in each instance, they stopped all but the most vital tasks and searched for the invaders. Once, they found a guardsman, separated and alone, a frail mortal who Morcath could capture for cyber-vivisection, slicing and peeling until she could retrace his steps and find the rest of the vermin. But the fortress slaves were half feral, even without the imperative cantrip activated. And once that switch was thrown, there was little she could do to restrain them. By the time she secured a maglev transport and directed it to the nearest stable chamber, the thralls had chewed him to little more than a skeletal marionette. We really should be feeding them more, she thought. Thankfully, Cadians made good helmets. The brain was intact. Few of the War Master's Brotherhood had retained a functioning omophagia organ. For reasons that remained unknown, the touch of the true universe appeared to either send it into maladjusted overdrive or wither it entirely. But she knew Cicadius Siron, the War Master's intelligence chief, was one of the few whose gene seed was healthy enough to practice the old art. Morcath could not help but watch, fascinated, as Siron's full lips chewed the Cadian's grey matter. "Lost," Siron proclaimed, as if judging the quality of a steak. In the terror of flight, he did not know where he was headed. How was he separated from the others? Not separated, severed. I see fortress doors opening and closing, chambers twisting. He was with the wolves. One said... He concentrated, lined brow furrowing. Yes? A wolf said the fortress was letting them through, or baiting them into a trap. They did not know which. It was allowing them passage through the wild deep, places we have not charged with the warp. Could the fortress be bringing them to us? That is what he thought, but the wolves did not believe so. They believed it wanted them there. Except then came a door that cycled like an airlock. Only one at a time could step through. He went through between others, but when he stepped through... Strange. Describe it to me. I will know. He stepped out of the door and saw them on the other side of a crystal wall, but they couldn't see him, and he was at an odd angle, looking at the bottom of their shoes as if the airlock chamber had moved like the cylinder of a stub revolver, depositing him in a neighboring room. He banged his hand numb on the wall, hearing them ask where he had gone, but they could not hear him. Then they walked. They walked up the wall like insects, footsteps echoing strangely, rising higher and higher in the limitless cyclopean chamber until their stab lights no longer played on the crystal wall. And then he ran? No. Then another door opened and he followed it. He followed it for 2 days until he heard voices. and thought he'd found the wolves again, but it was your thought trolls. He shrugged. Then they ate him. Was that helpful? It was, she said, sucking air over her blackstone teeth. Now I know why I have been unable to find the wolves. Do you? He asked. It was with a disarming casualness, almost conversational, and before Morcath caught herself, she almost betrayed too much to the spymaster. She had almost called the fortress my mother. The fortress has been hiding them from me, directing the vermin away from the reformatted and warp-treated parts of its body I can see, guiding them to a place it wants them to go. The will of eternity is aiding its own sabotage. And this pitiful mortal, what purpose in breaking it off from the group? A decoy. It knows I am searching. We must be getting close, and it's trying to divert the search to another sector of the fortress. It broke off the least valuable one, the one that it considered disposable. That is why I know the fortress is using him. Otherwise, he would not have survived alone. It is treating us like an infection, like parasites, trying to purge us. Morcath could say nothing to this because she knew it was true. Her mother fortress had rejected her entirely. Do you know that crystal chamber? The revolver cylinder? As Siren asked, he brought up a wireframe schematic of the known areas of the fortress. Purple warp blooms blossomed over the areas she had charged with empiric force. It was discovered here, yes? Close. Here, in the outer drive chamber. But I doubt the fortress is letting saboteurs into its motive array. There are several cylinder chambers like you described, but how many within 2 days' walk? One, she said, pointing. Here. One entrance leads to 4 branching pathways. Do any lead to critical systems? None that avoid chambers we've inhabited. They'll be spotted. Except... What's this? This red spot? Dead chamber, said Siren. Backfire from when we used the weapon. It vented strangely and burned away our organic additions. It was marked for you to recolonize. Gods of the warp. That chamber's the only buffer between the deep fortress and the port side shields. Summon a maglev. I'll get a team. He swiveled away from the schematic, raising a hand to his ear. Cell, Vega 2. Meet the fortress child at mag egress point 7. Full tactical loadout. Expect contact with Space Wolves boarding party and various Imperial auxiliaries. Bring melter weapons for Blackstone breaching. Consider the fortress hostile. Morcath opened her mind to the roiling chaos of the true dimension and slammed her hands onto her mother's bulkhead. In doing so, she both called a maglev and pumped the fortress full of the poison she felt at her betrayal. Around the hatch, the blackstone underneath the layer of webbed flesh moaned as the dermal surface ran to wet pink. Ivory horns emerged from the nascent gums surrounding the maglev hatch with a prickling maw of hooked teeth. Morcath hoped it hurt her, like she had her daughter. The Cadians had sprung their trap, and now Urkanthos ravaged it. He raked his claws through hab bunkers as though they were made of sponge. Artesia screeched in delight as her razor-edged shadows flowed into firing slits and decapitated Kazakin in sprays of gore. A squadron of sentinels ambushed his flank, stinging his ribs with las cannon fire, and he fought them like a grown man battling children. One he knocked flat with a backhand, crumpling its cockpit with the blow. With his axe he slew the second, driving the blade into the body like he would a skull and leaving it there, keeping his hands free to grab the third, rip open its armored paneling with his teeth, and pulverize the pilot with the butt of his caged head. "Prince," Artesia whispered.
Prince, look upon your host. We have been lost in slaughter too long. The hounds have sacrificed too much.
The orbits and solar variances of this physical world meant little to Acanthos now, still less the arbitrary division of those gravitational forces. Yet, as he looked through the red tunnel of his vision and saw the Blackstone fortress rising above the eastern horizon, he realized how long he'd reveled in butchery. He could see the evidence of it in the blood. So much vitae, an amount that made focusing difficult. Now that he'd slowed his violence, it was impossible to sense anything but the blood. The same way a rotting corpse drove out every smell in a room, the arterial bounty overcame all. Acanthos saw the world as blood on darkness, all moving slow. He knew walls only due to the splatters upon them, saw his hounds moving in their thick coats of gore, the fluid, underwater speed of their blows flinging arcs of crimson in the air. Pools of red describing casualties in the upper floors of the bunkers. The Bane blade Vicanthrus rolling over a squad of guardsmen, bursting them like skins of wine as they tried to escape a collapsing building. At the end of the street, 3 berserkers were flying apart. Rounds from a heavy weapon detonated inside them, so limbs tumbled and breastplates blossomed open to show wet outlines of shattered ribs and pulsing organs. There were so few left of his hounds. He had led them into these streets, knowing they would be an abattoir for both friend and foe, but he had never imagined such a price. For each dead Kazakin, they had to blast open plasteel doors, carve through casements, brave overlapping fields of fire from murderous heavy weapon squads, as well as the plasma and melter beams that curdled and cooked the blood with their passing. As Scourge Master of the Black Fleet and leader of the Hounds, he had always known that in a stand-up fight he would lose 1 berserker for every 50 guardsmen slain, 100 if the thing was done right. But these Kazakin, they were themselves warriors of the blood. He had never seen their like outside the hated, unenlightened chapters of the Adeptus Astartes. As his demon sight flew, he saw a wounded Kazakin discharging a hellgun point blank into a berserker's lower abdomen, his bayonet broken on the power armor. A sergeant with a power sword countercharged against a whole file of Lascare's pack, taking down one with his plasma pistol before a chain axe split him shoulder to hip. Several streets over, a line of bunker habs 4 blocks long lifted into the air in a curtain of flame, tearing apart 40 warriors from Pergaza's contingent. The mortals had contested the buildings until the Khornates stormed it, then triggered pre-rigged explosives. The Cadians had baited his warriors inside, then sacrificed their own lives to annihilate them.
"Count our dead to this,"
he said to Artesia, and she flashed off his shoulders and circled.
"How steep is the butcher's bill? 1 hound for every 30 mortal dead, master. They are standing unto death, bringing your warriors with them into the blood sleep. And they say the Adeptus Astartes know no fear. Even the corpse Empress' sons do not throw away their lives with such wantonness. 1 hound for every 30. It is unthinkable, perverse. And yet,"
hissed Artesia, clamping back onto his shoulders and whispering in his ears with bloody-lipped mouths that opened on each wing.
"the problem is also the solution. Look at the streets."
He looked and saw the rivers, a literal flood tide of blood, deep as a human hand, flowing down the rock-creeked streets and lapping in dead-end courtyards. Warriors splashed gouts of it as they ran, sent great deltas of it in the air when they fell.
"Call your kin,"
said Acanthos.
"This close to the antipathy broadcaster. They may not come. The the bloodletters fear it, the thing we are here to destroy. Their minds recoil at the vibrations of emptiness it projects within the city. Then cause something with no mind.
Acanthos knelt in the street, planting both hands into the tide of carnage. Heedless of the blizzard of lasfire that burned the air around him neon and blackened the muscles of his exposed back. So swelled was he with the power of the ritual offerings, he did not even feel it. If he let some of that power out, he would still have enough to break Cadia in two.
Come,
He bade.
come and run and feast. Push your muzzles deep into the foe and slake your thirst.
The blood stilled, mirror smooth. Surface going tacky and dark like a wound drying before a scab. Then Artesia gave a low whistle like a huntsman, and the skin of the blood began to stretch and distort like a membrane. Beasts pawed at the underside, thrusting blunt snouts against the elastic surface and stretching it so their rolling eyes were visible through the gore portal's distorted surface. Thin sounds of baying and snuffling came from a place far outside reality. Then a claw ripped through, and the membrane popped like a blister. Out of the hand-deep blood came creatures bigger than a human, scrabbling and snapping, huge heads emerging just before muscular shoulders that levered their bodies out of the rivers and pools of crimson. They barked and growled, shook themselves so droplets flew from their scaled hides and the cornate runes on their heavy collars flew back and forth. And then, with a mere thought from the archdemon who would become their master, they charged. The interior portcullis gate of the Musterfield dented inward with the force of the demon's might. Behind it, even through the stuttering fizz of the inner void shield, Creed could hear the howl of fleshless throats. The portcullis took another hammer blow. Across the Musterfield, behind the firing slits and crenulated slabs of an Aegis line, hastily thrown up between ferrocrete bunkers and readouts, the Cadian 8th waited. "Steady," he said, into the handset connected to Kel's Lord Hailer. They'd taken a position on the central redoubt, quad las cannon batteries positioned on either side. "They're coming through any minute now. Remember that at your back is the last free city on Cadia. At your front are your comrades in the Kazakin, who have sacrificed themselves to thin the enemy and absorb their strength. Supporting you are the Sisters of our Martyred Lady and the White Shields of the 111th, who look to you for an example of what a soldier of Cadia should be. At our flanks are the mighty Adeptus Astartes and armored war machines of our world and that of Vestroia. No regiment in the history of the Emperor's Imperial Guard can boast of such an honored position. And we will acquit ourselves in a way that shows reverence and thanks for this moment." He clicked off. "What's taken the big red bastard so long?" Creed mumbled. "I'm running out of speech." "You'll be through soon enough," Kel responded. "Took him 3 hours to get this far into the city when I thought I had at least 2 days. Now he's making us wait for it." That was putting it almost too simply, Kel thought. The abomination Acanthos had taken them off guard. Creed had expected a greater gathering of forces, swarms of spider-legged death engines, warp rituals, a heavier reliance on armor. But most crucially, he hadn't expected the 33rd to rout. Troops were not in place or fully briefed on their roles. Chains of command and lines of communication hadn't been established. The forces here on the marshalling ground had been hastily shouted together with Lord Hailers and a pen and paper map. And up in the Rosvar, the first Salvation forces were starting to emerge, far enough away and on such a short timeline, they might as well be on the eastern fringe. The 111th conscripts had been a stopgap measure, the only infantry unit ready to deploy, and Creed had never planned to use the Cadian 8th to absorb the breakout before it hit the heavier troops. But there was no one else he trusted to do it. Another blow rocked the portcullis. At least the Kazakin did their job, Kel said. They did. Poor devils. Do you want me to take over the speech? No, Kel. Just get the colours up. Make sure the warp some demon freckers can see them. I'll just fall back on the old reliable words. Yes, General. The portcullis exploded outward, not with the force of a demon, but blown clear of its hinges with high explosive. Through the haze came the hulking chassis of a Baneblade, its hull-mounted demolisher cannon smoking from blowing open the gate. The vehicle's 306 tons of bulk squeezed through the arch like the iron fortress it so very much was. Skulls decorated the sharpened pieces of rebar welded to its cupola and track guards. A flayed man was chained to its front, extra limbs sewn onto him to make the 8-pointed star of chaos. The tank fired, the round dropping short and to their right, fountaining debris 3 stories high. It ground towards them, the heavy machine moving slow. "Frick," said Creed, then raised the handset and clicked it on, saying what he always did when there seemed nothing else appropriate. "Cadia stands!" "Cadia stands!" the 8th Regiment echoed, ragged, nervous, pre-battle jitters. Even veterans got them. Kel opened his hailer. "I can't hear you, 8th! And if I can't hear you, the Emperor on his golden throne sure as Freck can't hear you! Again, for the Emperor, Cadia, and the Lord Castellan! 1, 2, 3... Cadia stands! They shouted, together now, with determination. Are they going to take this line